Disclaimer.
Should you watch The Batman? I'm gonna make this as quick as possible and as spoiler-free as possible because I just watched the movie, and I'm sure that there's tons of you out there wondering if this latest Batman reboot is actually worth your time. So without further ado, let's answer some questions you might have about this flick. What is The Batman? Directed by Matt Reeves, The Batman is yet another film reboot featuring the titular superhero of The Batman, played by Robert Pattinson. When the mayor of Gotham is murdered by a masked killer calling himself the Riddler, Batman must follow cryptic clues to uncover the Riddler's master plan before he kills more members of Gotham City's elite. Should you watch The Batman if you're a fan of the comic books? Yes, The Batman is extremely comic book accurate, basing its plot and story off of several beloved comics, but most notably Year 2, Year 1, Year 0, and The Long Halloween. However, comic book accuracy is only a feather in this movie's cap. All these characters play their roles fantastically, and help bring the bleakest version of Gotham City to life in a major way. Is The Batman better than The Dark Knight? Honestly, that's hard to say. I will say that The Dark Knight and The Batman are in the same tier of quality, but a one-to-one comparison can only get you so far, and I don't think it's super fair. It's like if you tried to compare Memento to Die Hard. They're both great movies, but because they're in different genres, which film you prefer is ultimately up to personal taste. If what you prefer is an action-centric film with lots of explosions and car chases, then you're probably gonna prefer The Dark Knight, because while The Batman does have that, it's not the primary focus of this movie. And don't get me wrong, The Batman does have a lot of really good action, but it's not the centerpiece of this movie. Ultimately, the story is focused on the murder, mystery, crime elements of the story. So what other films are similar to The Batman? If you like crime films like Seven or Zodiac, or you really like those old murder mystery film noirs like Chinatown, this film's gonna be right up your alley. Almost every Batman film thus far has focused on the Batman's role as a crime fighter, but I really appreciate that this film kinda recenters the Batman's character as the world's greatest detective, because that is ultimately what he was billed to be. The Batman is ultimately a murder mystery crime procedural with a lot of film noir elements, especially channeling elements of Seven and Zodiac. Again, I really appreciate them refocusing the character of Batman as a detective, because when you compare it to all the other Batman movies, it's honestly kind of refreshing. Is The Batman a dark or scary movie? I mean, I think it's obvious that both tonally and visually, The Batman is dark, but as far as scary, that's kinda based on your personal tolerances for the topics covered in this movie. Of course, in this movie, our main villain is the Riddler, but he's been given a sort of Zodiac Killer-esque spin that makes him a bit more disturbing than the Jim Carrey version. Now, of course, while the villain is disturbing, as far as scary, I feel like that question comes from a place of concern regarding blood, gore, and violence, and to that I say, this movie is PG-13. There is a little bit of blood, a little bit of violence, but if you've seen other Batman movies, you shouldn't be worried. Of course, tonally this movie is very bleak, but I feel like that should be obvious based on the fact that our main villain is a serial killer who murders the elites of Gotham in games of life or death to try and expose the so-called truths of the underbelly of the city. I think that much should be obvious from the trailers alone. But this bleakness especially shines with how the city of Gotham has been brought to life as this rotting cesspool of crime that most people might feel is beyond saving. It's incredibly cynical, but it fits with the genres that this movie is trying to emulate. And that cynical tone this movie is chasing is very much reflected in its inspirations. I very much get Chinatown and Big Sleep vibes from this movie. Even despite being visually dark, you can still see the action perfectly clear. And honestly, more life is breathed into Gotham through the deep dark shadows and the blinding search helicopter lights. This is honestly one of the most visually compelling and visually memorable films that we've seen from the Batman in a long time, and I like that a lot. Is The Batman a long movie? Undeniably, yes. The Batman is a stupidly, disgustingly long 3-hour film, but thankfully the pacing helps keep things moving along, so you won't feel the length of this movie unless you chugged one of those extra large ices before entering the theater. While the pacing is generally pretty good, I feel like those last 15 to maybe 20 minutes of the movie do feel like a bit of a slog. It does feel like there's 4 separate scenes where the movie could end and it just keeps going, and that is a common problem I find with these longer movies. You just have so many thematic and story elements you have to tie into little bows that the movie ends a bunch of times, and you're like, when is this gonna end? So, is The Batman good? The bottom line is, I had really high hopes for The Batman. I was really hoping this movie would refocus Batman Center as the world's greatest detective, and generally, this movie succeeds, and I'm very satisfied with it. I love that this movie shows that the Batman is powerful and intimidating and intelligent, but also, partially because he's new to this job, he makes mistakes, and he gets hurt and injured and needs to sit down for a second and take a breather. It's nice seeing Batman be more than just this invincible powerhouse and being more down to earth and human. And his compelling performance is only further accentuated by Robert Pattinson, who I have to give credit to for making Batman a little bit of an emo freak. The Batman undeniably sits in the high-tier ranking of comic book movies, not only because its execution is really good, but also because it breaks the mold set out by most superhero movies. I mean, we're all familiar with the formula of superhero movies by now. You have a tragic backstory which leads to the origin story, we ramp up fighting the first villain, the villain kidnaps the love interest, we save the love interest and show off how awesome and cool it is to be a superhero. Even though this movie is a reboot and it is an origin story, it doesn't really follow this formula that much. And the ways it diverts from this formula is extremely refreshing, and I hope that further comic book movies take note. But is this Batman movie the best Batman movie ever made? And I certainly have some thoughts on that topic, as well as Batman's legacy in film as a whole, but I'll have to save those thoughts for another day. So if you want to see me make that video, be sure to subscribe and let me know in the comment section down below. Let us know what you thought of this review by dropping a like or dislike and leaving us a comment. If you've already seen The Batman, I especially want to hear your take on this movie, so please let me know in the comments where we agree and disagree. I'm very interested to see what people think of this movie. I really hope you'll stick around, because we cover all types of media on this channel, and we've got tons of videos on the way that you won't want to miss. Okay, thanks, bye!